We have a quorum.
We're here.
But Kennedy and the new man is absent. Have you looked at the agenda and get a motion to adopt it?
I move.
I'll second.
Good. Any further discussion? If not, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, motion carried. Approve the minutes. Have you read them? Are there any additions,
Did you have any?
I
corrections, or
didn't have any
deletions to it?
corrections.
They're pretty short.
I'll move to accept the minutes.
I'll second.
Okay, any further questions? If not, all in favor, say aye.
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 Okay, select a
I
chairperson.
thought you might have a full complement this week, but I was quite mistaken. So I recommend that we wait one more month.
So,
Yes.
I don't remember doing that before. Selecting a chairperson.
You probably already had one.
Okay. So why are we selecting? I'm just curious.
Because you have new people.
Okay.
They should have a chance to decide.
Mike, will Tim do it another year?
If you want him to, I'm sure.
Okay,
Yeah.
I would like to nominate him for it.
Let's wait till he's here.
What?
Why don't we wait till he's here?
Let's table this for a month.
Okay,
Yeah. That sounds fair. I was under the impression that he was the chairperson because he was on the council. No, he's just, in that capacity, he's just the emissary or whatever from the
Yep.
city council.
That's right.
Okay.
The board gets to determine who the board wants to have run the meetings.
I see.
And you don't have to have, I mean, you can pick them every meeting if you want, but just it's simpler to have one person that's kind of designated.
Okay, yeah. But this is not it's not a rule.
Nope, and there's no authority that comes with being the chairperson, there's just work to do.
Okay. Great, I say we give it to Tim.
all right, public hearings, there's none.
Okay.
How about old business? Is there any old business to come before this board?
Oh, we have a lot.
So much.
Yeah.
Okay, then we'll move into the housing project draft request for proposals.
Mm-hmm.
Should we just start, did anybody have any questions about any of this? And then people should just say what they think about it.
Yeah. I didn't really have anything specific. I bet you do.
Why do you say that?
Yes, I do.
I don't know. It strikes me that this is usually how this goes. And then once she starts talking, then I go, oh, yeah.
I'll show you what I worked on over
Oh
the
my
last
God.
month. So,
That's awesome.
Please
Really.
do.
Yeah.
I've been thinking about this housing issue
Okay.
and what is it we're trying to figure out? What is the problem we're trying to solve? And
Mm-hmm.
of course, it's a very complicated issue with many different parts. And so I've been doing my research. And because this has been an issue in our community for years, and there's been lots of organizations that have looked and done studies.
Mm-hmm.
I know the last meeting, I said we need to collect data and we need to figure out the whole thing. I kind of think a lot of that has already been done and I don't think we need to recreate the wheel. I haven't
Okay.
totally read this. I've scanned it. I can't observe it yet.
Okay.
But there's a lot of information here. There's a lot of information on the internet,
Okay.
and it details Grand Marais. So when I look at this scope of work that needs to get done,
Yep.
I really am gearing towards, I think we need to look at our zoning issues.
Mhm.
What is preventing the market from providing this need? We all talk about it's a need,
Mm-hmm.
and I want to look at what is preventing the market from providing this. And I contacted a realtor who also does rentals.
Mm-hmm.
She gave me a lot of information.
Mm-hmm.
And I got the sense from her also that part of it is what it costs to develop a piece of land in Grand Marais. And is it zoning? So, okay, then I started reading our zoning stuff, and
Right.
there's lots of pages there. And I have to admit, if it's a 30-foot setback or it's a 40-foot setback, I really don't know what the difference is and what that means in the long run. So, I guess what I'm saying is I would like us to focus, when we talk about all these components and asking, where do we start? My opinion is we need to start with the zoning. We really need to figure out different areas of our city. What do we allow? What is not allowed? And what's the reason for that?
Okay.
I was looking at our R2 district, where we say that's supposed to be,
Doesn't make much sense.
no, it does not make any sense. And I'm like, why did we choose that? There's single family, there's no land to build there. So I really think we have to look at the whole thing and what's in our city, what is developable,
Yep. There we go.
and what
Exactly.
makes sense going forward, and make sure. I mean, I don't think we need to ask somebody to go and compile the data for us, or pay somebody to do that. We have enough data to know there's a problem,
Okay.
so that's my opinion.
Okay.
There's lots of other things that factor into this, but that's
Right.
one of the top ones right now.
Okay, then off of what you're saying, I'd just like to ask you, Mr. Mike, how, what would we get differently than what we already have if we were to do a study at this point? I mean, obviously things change, and that's 2015, it's not 2015.
Right.
But in terms of, at least in terms of things that we have any control over, like zoning, what would we get that we don't have?
Well, I'd say, first of all, I don't imagine that we have to create much of this data that we're asking for.
Okay.
It's more about organizing it,
Ah.
sourcing it, compiling it, and putting it in a usable format. So let's just look at a few potential conversations that might occur when we look at our zoning ordinance.
Okay.
It costs what it costs because of the density that we allow. So the more units that you can connect per foot of pipe you get to bury in the ground, or per foot of street you have to build, the less it costs
Right.
to build them.
Yeah.
In order to get more density, to reduce the cost, you can allow smaller lots, you can allow more units on a lot, you can allow more coverage of a lot. There's a lot of different ways to go at that.
Mm-hmm.
So if we're going to talk about, for instance, and we'll just make this up, it's completely
Yeah.
arbitrary, it doesn't matter, right? We want 5,000 square foot lots instead of 10,000 square foot lots. In order for that to be anything but completely arbitrary, we ought to know what it looks like. We ought to know what the neighborhood's current conditions are, so that we can imagine, was this going to be a big change or not? We ought to be able to look at a different part of the city and say, okay, here, they're already 5,000 square foot lots, so why wouldn't we allow it? Versus here, where they're all 10 to 12, and maybe we don't want to. So this housing study doesn't really do that. It doesn't look at our existing conditions very much. Most of those housing studies that we've done are trying to establish a trend about what our demand is in the future. How many houses should we try to get built every year?
Okay.
And I don't see that as the question. I don't think we have any question about whether there's need for more housing. That seems
Right.
pretty well established.
Okay.
So this is more about creating strategies that we think will work, and also that we're willing to accept the consequences of. So I think getting this data, in particular getting it in a usable format where we can look at a map and understand what's going on in the community, will help us. I also think there's a few particular things that have been brought up in the conversations with the Planning Commission, with the City Council, about this that we haven't studied before, but that there seems to be some need to get data about, like, how many vacation rental units are there? Well, that's not hard to get that number and put it on a map, maybe even. But once you start thinking about all the other things you want to do that with, and now there's 50 things where you want to get that data and put it on a map, that's a lot of work. And it's probably going to be useful for us when we're having these conversations.
Yeah.
But it takes some effort to do that and some expertise.
Okay.
Another one that we haven't ever studied, and the data maybe doesn't exist and needs to be, what somebody has to figure out how to get it, is vacant properties or seasonal properties. And I know, for instance, Kelly's talked a lot about she doesn't have any neighbors left in her neighborhood. Like, all the houses around her are empty. And that sort of anecdote is really powerful. Now, taking that real data that we might have and mapping it on the city gives us a real clear indication of what's going on. And we might find out then that that's a much bigger problem, for instance, than vacation rentals. And if we're going to look at our zoning ordinances or other regulations, that's the problem that we're trying to address.
Yeah.
So that's where I'm saying, starting with a baseline of all the data that we can come up with that's relevant to this, and putting it in a format that's usable, understandable for people,
Yep.
is a worthwhile start.
So I have a question about that, because at the commissioners' meeting, they voted to hire Wayne Hinchy to input survey data. And I went and talked to the recorder's office later about that, and it turns out Grand Marais is kind of excluded from that process. But that survey data has not been collected in a good way over the years and inputted and gathered and put into the GIS system.
Right?
Is that important to us? Is to make sure that we know where the lot lines are in the city of Grand Marais?
It's sometimes it's really important, but is it important that we know where all of them are all the time? Not really, you know? And is it important to this issue about housing? Probably not at
Probably
a
on the
policy
back
level.
end. Yeah,
Like
when
when
people
we
want-
implement
Yeah.
Okay.
each solution, then property owners are going to need to know that. But
Right.
just for us to know it on a policy level, I don't think so.
I didn't know if it, before we made a decision of changing lot sizes, if we had to have better lines in on our mapping system.
Right.
I didn't.
Well, one of the things that's really in our favor here is that, right? Almost all of the residentially developed properties in Grand Marais are already platted. So, I mean, there's 25-foot lots, 30-foot lots, and 40-foot lots all over town. That's what was originally platted. And we end up with a lot of 75-foot and 80-foot lots because they used to be 25 and 40, and they're just using 2 or 3 of them.
Right.
And 75 feet and 130 feet of depth is a little more than 10,000 square feet. So it all kind of works. It all ends up being the way that our zoning ordinance
Yes.
described it.
Yeah.
But I love your question, Stacy, about, well, why is it that we want 10,000 square foot lots? What is it we're trying to accomplish with that?
Mm-hmm.
Is it, if we don't know that, then one, we might screw it up if we change it. But two, we might be holding on to a rule that doesn't have any relevance.
It doesn't
anymore.
serve us anymore. Yeah.
Yeah.
And it did seem like that's just over the conversations we've had over the last few years. It does seem like we keep saying that, like somehow
Yeah.
we keep running up against it. Like it's a dumb rule in this case. Oh, and it's also a dumb rule for this case, and and we make exception after exception, and then and now we know we have a density issue, or possibly a density issue. So yeah.
Well, one of the
So-
things that happened between last meeting and this meeting is the city council got together and had a workshop to establish what their priorities are. And your last meeting, that was one of the bits of information that you wanted to have before you made a decision about how to proceed here. And they selected housing as one of their top priorities that they want to see
Great.
worked on. And I think, I mean, they didn't set a budget for it, but they, when looking at the spectrum of get it done cheaply with our own or local forces versus get it done at high quality and timely manner, they were much more about that.
So do we have numbers
Great.
yet? Do we have a clue of what this might cost?
No, we don't. And I think that the way we've set this ask up, we're going to get individual prices for each of these 4 components.
Okay.
And we're also going to get some kind of budget information about how those prices are established. So how much time are they budgeting for their people, at what rates to do this?
Okay.
And we can use that information to make decisions about, well, which of these do we want to hire out or try and tackle ourselves or get somebody else to do? Or we want to pick that firm to do that and that firm to do that.
And does that, I mean, presumably you've done this before, does that usually work out, or can it work out to have individual groups do different pieces
Yeah,
of the same
absolutely.
project? Okay.
Yeah. I mean, because I think these are different enough things.
Okay,
They all work together in the end,
right.
but there's really nothing about 1 and 2 that you have to do at the same time or that you do this and you
Okay.
learn this. They're very different
Okay.
processes. And you know, 1 is looking at the data, 2 is looking at the regulations, and then 3 is looking at what other people are doing. So they're all 3 very separate things. And then this 4th is bringing it all together.
Yeah.
And I don't know that we'll end up with a bunch of stuff that we couldn't have just brainstormed ourselves and started working on, you know? But is that, you know, do we want to do that? Just let's pick a few ideas and start working on them?
Well, we know that's what they did before, and that didn't work out, so.
I don't even really know what they did before.
Oh, right.
I
Well, I
do
mean-
know that this has been something that's been talked about as a priority for a long time,
Mhm.
and only recently have there been, I think, significant efforts to try and address it through government action.
Okay.
So I think it's worth our investment to set this up in the front end with some
Good.
help to get us going. And then what's it going to look like after this is done? We're going to have a list of things that are ordinances or programs that we offer
Mhm.
that we want to start working on. And we're just going to
Yeah.
pick them off 1 or 2 at a time and make changes.
Yeah.
Back a few years ago, Ted Mershon and I did a plat look at the whole city of Grand Marais, and 63% of the city is tax exempt. Now it's 65% of the city. And city planners would look at that and they would, I think they would say that should be a concern. Are we going to limit, are we going to let the Coast Guard station be a museum on a prime piece of property? We've got to kind of change our attitude about some of this stuff. And it's going to bite us someday. You got the prime property on the lake down there is a trailer park, and I'm not against that. I know I can't overturn it, but it was done without any referendum, and it was put through the city council. And if you took an accountant and asked him to present value that, the money that comes in off the park probably loses $3 million to $4 million based on the value of the present value of the land.
Well,
And
I
I
would disagree
I know
with
I
that.
can't do anything about this, but it's always bothered me. And if we're going to keep continuing doing this, I don't think we can afford to. I think we've got to look at that ratio. It's lopsided. We need the hospital, we need the school, and we need those things. I'm not contemplating changing any of that, but when you're talking about that piece of property out of the point there and turn it into a boat museum, in my opinion, is wrong.
That's a tricky
Oh.
one
Yeah.
to have a
Pardon me?
conversation about.
Yeah.
But let's roll this back to a piece of property that has been discussed as it's currently owned by the city and it may need to be developed privately, and that's inside of the Gunflint Trail turn as it's heading up the hill. So north of the Gunflint Trail, west of Fifth Avenue.
Okay.
that is part of what's been called the old ski hill. And even the report that was done 20 years ago said, you know, if you're going to develop any of this down towards the bottom, makes more sense. More recently, with the Sawtooth Bluffs master plan, they looked at that piece and said, well, if all we do is talk about housing, here's a piece of property that's close to utilities. We can't really use it for this regional park because it's across a major road.
Right, yeah, so it
Maybe
is
you
on the
should develop
downside.
it.
Okay.
Now, I think you're going to get a few ideas like that out of this process,
Mhm.
where you say, well, here's a piece of property that we own that could be developed for housing. And we'll get an opportunity then to say, do we want to do that or not? Do we want to make it available? Do we want to do it ourselves? Do we want to drag the EDA in and ask them to help us find a partner or develop it with us? Or
But let's make sure we have the lot sizes right before we do it.
Sure.
I mean, we can look and see, you know, I mean, it is our instinct to say like, that is our problem, but let's find out with good data. We can say, yes, it's definitely that, and let's go.
So this map that we want to build, where it says these are homesteaded properties and these are vacant properties or non-homestead, whatever the terminology, can we put one on there? These are tax exempt properties and have those layered on the map also.
Sure. I think that'd be pretty easy. Again, you know,
And
it's not.
tax exempt owned by whom, whether it's state or county or city.
Or federal, national.
Yeah.
We have a housing expert sitting right over there, and Mary, she's done a lot of studies, and do you have any comments, Mary?
No, I'm just here to listen right now
Okay.
and to help if we can.
We have, you know, approved some special zoning, but that house on 8th Avenue that Aunt Moody built was below the 10,000 feet, but it's very economical, and it's low-income housing, and it's a good house. Easy to heat. There's only 850 square feet to it, so there's a lot of different things that fit in places.
Oh, yeah.
Sometimes we have to waive that 10,000 square feet, and we did on that one. And I've been around here so long, I remember several others, but I don't want to waste your time reciting them.
Oh, yeah, we keep running into that. That is an
Oh.
issue.
So the idea behind this is, if you're okay with it, we'll start sending it out tomorrow.
That would be awesome.
And by the time your next meeting comes around, we'll have the responses.
So who are we
Great.
sending it to?
We'll send it to a list of planning agencies that we can come up with, ARDC, like that type of agency. We'll also post an ad for it on the League of Minnesota Cities website where people that do this might look for it. We'll put it in the local newspaper, although I don't know
I
if
was
there's
wondering
much
about
it's going to say.
universities, schools, if there would be some grad student that was like, oh, I could do this little part as a project.
Well, they might be checking the boards.
And the problem with that is the scheduling of it, not the resource of it. So if there's somebody that's looking for a project and ours is here and the schedules work out, that'd be great. And we'll have to think about how to access that, how to get the word out to them.
Mhm.
There's only a handful of schools that
That do that.
do this kind of
Mhm.
program in the state, so we can
Yeah.
take a look at that. There's a planning association too for professional planners. We'll post it with them as well. We're also just trying to ask people who to send it to, you know. There's a lot of time built into this. It probably has more. We're asking for responses by March 29th, which is like the last Friday in March, and people don't
And
need
is that enough time? That was my next thing.
more
It's
than
like,
enough
I
time.
would-
I actually
I
think
would
if we
love to get it that soon, but I don't want to.
if we get the word out tomorrow, that's I mean that's what is that 4 weeks?
Yeah.
So that's the 2 weeks is enough for somebody who does this professionally to figure out what a budget is. This is only set up because Well, it doesn't help you to get it any earlier. You're not going to meet before then.
Right.
And I assume you want to be involved in the selection process. So,
Are these priorities suggested by the city council in any particular, are they all equal suggestions?
Oh, I
or
see.
can you ask that question right after we approve this?
Yep.
Was there anything in here you wanted to see changed other than your suggestion about the tax exempt property?
No, I think my other issues are other things, so, yeah.
Okay,
And that will come, do you think that will just
That will
plunk
come
in with
later,
the
yes.
data? that-
when
Okay.
we
As
get
we're
there.
doing
As
it?
we're doing it, yes.
Good.
so.
yeah.
Yeah.
All right, then,
Yeah.
then we'll do it.
All right.
Yes, the city council priorities. It is,
Weighted in some way?
yeah, so the first page is the community vision and values. That's not,
Is that for a motion on that?
we need a motion on
those are not weighted. Those are just all that were identified in the process. The second page, the priorities, the back of the packet, yes, those are in order,
Okay.
prioritized in order. And so particularly relevant to this group is the idea that the council wants to see an effort to work on updating the city code and enforcement of the city code. So the enforcement question has been through here before, and this board has said, we don't want to be involved in that. So that's okay. But the what we're enforcing part of it, maybe you do actually want to be involved in that. So I can say of all of these priorities, that's the one we're really the least ready to do something about. I don't have a lot of ideas yet on how we're going to approach this, other than,
You mean approach the enforcement piece?
no, the city code update piece.
Oh, okay.
You know, it's something where you can actually, there's companies that do this, right? They'll come and fix your code for you. But there's
Great.
100 policy decisions that have to be made in that process. And, 20 of them are really big. It takes years to go through that if you want to do it all. And so I want to figure out how do we narrow it down to our top 5 or top 10 issues that we're trying
Within
to
the
address.
code. Okay.
And how do we involve the community in that conversation so that we pick the things that they want to see us address. We can assume that the council selected this priority because they're hearing about it, and you're hearing about it. And so there's your feedback from the community on why this is an issue. But now, what do we pick? Is it junkyards? Is it vehicles parked in the street and campers in front yards like we've been talking about?
Mhm.
Is it vacation rentals that are operating illegally?
Yes.
Or is it 10 other things that we haven't heard about yet? I'm guessing it's not wherever people put their propane tanks, even though we've spent some time on that this past year. There's just a million different little things that it could be, and if we could focus it in on, its aesthetic considerations or its noise what is the issues that we're really trying to solve before we start in on looking at our code? I think that'll help us focus and get better results.
I like that approach very much.
So now we have to figure out how to do that. That's just going to take a little more time.
Yeah. Yeah, even as you say it, I mean, we'd have to get through the code and decide, like, here are the categories even within that.
Yeah.
To decide, okay, well, yeah, because you're just mentioning a few, and I'm sure there are a lot more that.
There's like I said, there's probably 100 policy decisions, and you're going to redo the code, and it might end up being a process that's a lot like the back end anyway of this study we're looking at here. I don't know that we'll need to do data collection, but somebody's going to have to look through all the code for each issue that we decide is important and figure out all the places in the code where we touch that issue. Because it's not usually that this issue is so discrete that it's just one thing in the code that applies to it. There's often 3 or 4 different ways that we try and get at something.
Right.
That's the first half of that project. Then the enforcement piece is a whole other issue. And if you'd still like to stay out of that, then I'll respect that and leave it for the council.
No, I don't know. I mean, I think that And what would that, I mean, what do you mean by that, stay out of the enforcement piece? I mean, I know that we've said, not our job, not our problem, but, you know, should it be? I mean, I guess that's the question I would put forward. I mean, what do most cities do? Like, I don't even know.
Yeah, that there is no most.
Okay.
And if you even look at just most cities our size,
Mhm.
I think there's such a spectrum
Okay.
of how this is approached.
Okay.
Because we don't enforce the building code, we don't have any, and we don't have a police department.
Mhm.
Like, we've literally shed every enforcement agency piece that we might have. We have no infrastructure for enforcement
Okay.
except for
But the
people
state of
that have
Minnesota
other
is-
jobs.
overrides, you know, if a contractor's doing something, he has to follow the state of Minnesota guidelines. And if we hire a lot of people to do that, I think it would be a mistake.
Well, I'm not even taking a position on it, although maybe that's one of the things that the community says is a code they want us to look at. But the fact that we don't do it means we don't have enforcement agents.
Right.
A building inspector is someone that's regularly doing enforcement. And code enforcement and building inspections are often in the same department in a city. And that we don't have our own police officers where we can tell them this code enforcement is a part of your duties. Well, then, and our strategy's been pretty clear too. It's complaint based for the most part. So we're not going out and looking for code violations unless they're really obvious or causing a problem that, you know, we wait for somebody to tell us it's a problem.
Yeah.
So I think that's what the city council's saying they want to do different. And
Yeah.
that means they're going to have to look at, and we'll help, you know, put together the plan, what resources they're going to need to add in order to accomplish
Actually
that.
do that, yeah. And it's not, I mean, obviously we deal with the law enforcement that we have here. And is that just, do we contract with them, or what is
We
that
do,
relationship?
yeah. We contract with them. And
And
they've
could
done
we-
some.
Well, sure, and I'm just wondering, like you were saying, could we is that a possibility? Is that
Absolutely,
something we
yeah,
can do?
it's
Okay.
it's absolutely a possibility.
Okay.
And you know, funny, the second priority that the council selected was update the city-county agreements. And there's three in particular that they've targeted that they think need to be updated, and that's
Okay.
the agreement with the Y, because our contract with the county doesn't describe the relationship in an accurate way anymore, because they've made changes with their agreement with the YMCA.
Oh, okay.
So it needs to be updated. And then law enforcement,
Okay.
which has been in place for more than 20 years now and hasn't changed the language in the contract nor the price.
Mhm.
And yet the things that we want to accomplish with it probably have changed. So we have to go back and talk about it. And then the road maintenance, we have an agreement that is, well, far older and has taken on a life of its own that doesn't really, whatever it started as, that's not what it is now. And everyone understands pretty clearly how it operates now, but that doesn't seem as very related to the actual words on paper anymore.
Okay.
And so that needs to be cleaned up. And that the idea being that we know we have got a complex relationship with the county financially and otherwise, and it doesn't make sense to try and deal with one of these without understanding the implications it has for the other ones.
Yeah.
So that if we're going to talk about city code and enforcement, and we're also going to talk about the law enforcement agreement, there's an opportunity for those to be the same conversation.
Yeah.
We got to keep in mind too that we're a small city. What's the latest census? 1,350 people living here.
Yeah, we'll get back to you next year.
Yeah.
Do.
That hasn't changed much since 1940.
No, if anything,
In
it's
fact, I
gone a
think in
little bit up,
40
a
it
little
was
bit
more.
down. Yeah. It hasn't changed much. The other piece of this that you may be asked to be involved in is the last one, capital improvement plan. That's not something that we've done with this group, but it's actually something that planning commissions often do get involved in, is thinking about capital improvement planning.
Okay.
A lot of the time that's because when you're talking about capital improvement planning, you're talking about growth. It seems like less important that you'd be involved in talking about which streets we need to reconstruct, because that's really based on condition and usage more than it's based on anything else.
Right.
And there's not a lot of input needed in that kind of conversation. But, now we're talking about City Hall liquor store redevelopment. We're talking about housing, and where our infrastructure exists is a big part of that conversation. So it's possible that some of those things could get rolled back and this group could get involved in it. But it's a big list, as you
Yeah.
can
Yeah,
see.
it's huge.
Um,
I mean, each one of them is.
Each one of them's a big deal, and
Yeah.
there's 6. And of course, they had a lot more than these 6. And part of the magic of this exercise is that you have to make choices, because we have limited resources, and even if it's just our own time, when we can't possibly do everything that's on everybody's list. But these made it to the top.
Well, let's hope that we get good bids that come in and we can get work, and they don't have to worry about number 5. We'll take care of it.
You got this one. Now, I think it's important to look at the words they used. They want to invest in housing. And that was, we'd brainstormed a lot of ideas, right, about what the issues were that were going to be done. And invest in housing was one of the ideas that was brainstormed that caught on with the council. And when they voted for what they wanted to do, that was what they said. So that implies that it's not just about regulations, it's also about financial contribution or spending, and that they'd be willing to invest
Yeah.
to see
And-
this addressed.
And I would say that maybe part of the first investment is paying for this data that we need, having
Yeah.
that done. I mean, because that's where I would, I know what they might be thinking, spending dollars on something, but I think spending dollars to figure out the right code to get those things in place.
Yeah.
And then
Or-
start talking about roads and utilities and,
That's where
How
I'm
we-
saying,
how we connect
that's how you
everybody
could
up and-
invest. You spend money on roads and utilities to help if we
Mhm.
say, this is an area we see is
Right.
ripe for development.
Yeah.
right.
Not
What I-
that you need to put up a building yourself, the city, but let's
Well,
make sure
yeah.
the infrastructure's
You know,
there.
we wouldn't do it, but the EDA might, and if
Right.
that
And
if
we
not the
could give
EDA,
them-
they might find developers that would.
Yeah, I
But
mean,
we
we
know
can make it an encouragement of hey, you guys, come here.
what's nice about using the word invest is it opens up the possibility that we're going to be financially into this, which is, I think, important for people to understand that if we want results, we might have to pay for them.
Right.
But it also implies that we're concerned about the return we're getting on our money.
Yeah.
That investing meaning we're going to build a bunch of new roads and water and sewer and hope somebody builds houses on them
It's
is
not
not a good
working.
investment.
I think the EDA might have something to tell.
Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm on the EDA,
Oh, sorry. Whoa. Thanks, Hal. So that's just information for you.
Yeah.
At your next meeting, if we don't get any public hearing type requests, we're just going to look at responses from the housing and make some decisions about who we're going to work with and get
Yeah.
that started.
That's great. That'll be awesome.
It's exciting.
Yeah. And there's not an action to be taken on this other than to say go man.
Yeah, if you want something different, take action. If you like the way it's going,
Yeah.
We'll see you in a
I'll be
month.
happy to see those come in. And it'd be great to put Stacy's work to work.
Yeah. Make sure you write that zoning part really good, because I want 4 different applicants
do you?
to choose from, yeah.
What if we get one and it's the right one?
There we
Well,
go.
I hope, but I like to have choice.
I like to have cinnamon and sugar and chocolate. Choice.
Oh, yeah. I think we're good, Hal.
All right. You ready? You gonna ring the bell?
Yeah.
Okay.
Adjourned?
I'll make a motion that we adjourn.
I'll
I
second
like
it.
short meetings.
We can always count on you for that, Hal.
But these are good, these are very good priorities.
Yeah.
And every one of them